A very warm welcome to all our esteemed speakers and participants at the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2022 workshop on grid integrated vehicles organized by Global Smart Energy Federation in partnership with India Smart Grid Forum. India's commitment to the climate goals would drive proliferation of distributed RE resources connected to the medium voltage and low voltage distribution grid. EVs and rooftop PV systems can complement each other if EVs have vehicle-to-grid functionalities like creating reverse power flow and storage in the EV batteries through surplus generation of RTPV systems. By using V2G's functionality, a large number of EVs connected to the grid can be aggregated at virtual power plant that can provide ancillary services and flexibility to the grid, which is becoming critical for stable grid operation. With this background, we'll start today's workshop. Here's a quick look at the agenda. Welcome remarks will be by Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai from India Smart Grid Forum. Theme presentation on grid integrated vehicles will be by Rodney McGee from University of Delaware. For our panel discussion on managing grid integration of electric vehicles, we have Catherine Lucas Haley from Australian National University, Mr. Randhir Singh, Director, Niti Aayog, Ms. Lonike Dressen-Mutters from Open Charge Alliance, Mr. Rodney McGee from University of Delaware, and Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai from India Smart Grid Forum. This panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Girish Katikar, who is the advisor for India Smart Grid Forum and energy leader, Electric Vehicle Digital Business Technologies, General Motors. And the concluding remarks will be by Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai. Now I would request Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai to give the welcome remarks and introduction. Mr. Reggie is the president of India Smart Grid Forum since its inception in 2011 and is also the chairman of Global Smart Energy Federation since November 2016. He is an internationally renowned expert with nearly 4 decades of experience in the electric sector. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants from around the world. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar or a side event of Asia Clean Energy Forum 2022. For a third year in a row, unfortunately or fortunately, I must say, Asia Clean Energy Forum is happening online. Otherwise, until 2019, more than 2,000 people used to congregate in the ADB headquarters in Manila. And I have had the honor of and pleasure of attending several editions in the last 10-15 years at ACEF. This is one of the very, very important programs which ADB started, and all the key players in renewable energy and electric grid modernization, electric mobility used to be part of this signature program. And with, in a way, it's happening online for 3 years, which has facilitated people, those who have not been able to travel to Manila. So a typical, as I mentioned yesterday, also we had another program on a side event at the same time on replacement of DG set or diesel generating set with lithium-ion batteries. So, so the audience being different, for the risk of repetition for those who are attending both the programs, I would like to mention side events like this, when it used to be there, when it was only physical, we typically used to get 50-60 people. That's the size of the room which used to be allocated at ADB for side events. So when we do this on the digital platform, we have hundreds of people. So in 2020, when the ACEF moved to digital platform, the first side event which ISGF organized was on blockchain applications for electric utilities, and we had more than 1,100 registrations, and at any point in time there were more than 1,000 people from all 5 continents. We had people, so it was as its own plus and minus, and we hope that next year Asia Clean Energy Forum will happen physically, and we will have an opportunity to meet all of you face to face after several years. So according to the latest Bloomberg New Energy Finance EV report, which most of you are familiar with the BNEF and their EV outlook, which they have been publishing for the last 6 years. So the latest 2022 report published a week ago, and they say that 20 million passenger vehicle or electric cars are on the road today. And the first million was added only in 2016. And the second, sorry, 2017. And the second million was added in 1 year. And thereafter, every year, the numbers been going high and high. And the projection is that this 20 million passenger vehicles are besides 1.3 million commercial vehicles and 280 million two-wheelers and three-wheelers globally. So the annual sales of EVs in 2021 was 6.6 million. This is expected to be 20.6 million by 2025, going almost 4 times. So what you know, those who've been following the electric vehicle and battery space and also renewable energy in last 10 years, every projection have been defeated. Actual offtake has been much higher than every expert's predictions. So from that perspective, we expect this 20 million electric vehicles per year sale by 2025 will be much higher. And India is among the few countries, large countries, which have came out with a very aggressive program on electric vehicle rollout. In 2013, when we launched our program, electric mobility program, we envisaged a target of about 5 to 7 million electric vehicles by 2020, which included about 2 million four-wheelers and 5 to 6 million two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Well, those were very, very aggressive targets, but we are quite happy with what we have achieved in the last 10 years or 8 or 9 years after that. There is a consensus among all stakeholders that electric mobility is the future and we have to take this journey forward. We have also constituted, on the request of India Smart Grid Forum, the Bureau of Indian Standards constituted a committee, ETD 51 in 2017, and that committee been working tirelessly round the clock for framing standards for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we are far ahead of several advanced countries in terms of EV charging infrastructure standards. The first standard we had issued in 2018, followed by several set of standards, and we still need to do few standards which we hope will be able to complete in by end of next year. So India follows in electricity. We follow the European standards. We follow 220 volt and 50 hertz. So, and many other standards of the IEC, International Electrotechnical Committee. That's what we follow. So based on that, we have adopted the IEC standards for our India standards. That is the CCS. CCS 2 is the standard which we have adopted, and our series of standards is 17017 and -1, 2, 3 different standards we have. I won't get into the details of that. So one thing which we have been convinced right from beginning is that AC chargers, where the vehicles will be connected to the grid for longer period of time. People go to office, you connect the vehicle till evening, or you come back home, you connect the vehicle or with a charger overnight. So AC charging stations where the vehicles will be connected for several hours is the ones which can be leveraged for vehicle to grid or bidirectional flow of electricity. So Professor Willett Kempton from University of Delaware, considered to be the father of electric mobility or integration of automobiles with the grid. We've been discussing with him for the past couple of years, and he has also supported us in the Global Smart Energy Federation issued a white paper in 2020, and that paper also Professor Kempton and his team contributed. Today we have in this webinar Rodney Mackey, who is a student of Professor Kempton, and currently he is the chief engineer of the electric mobility program at University of Delaware, going to give a team presentation on how a fleet of electric vehicles they have rebuilt the electric vehicles, and they've been providing frequency and voltage support or ancillary services support to the PJM grid in the United States. So this is way ahead. Maybe 10 years ago, they have demonstrated this, more than 10 years ago. And due to regulatory challenges in different geographies, this has not become a mainstream. Whereas in India, we believe that we will be able to overcome the regulatory challenges and roll out vehicle to grid technologies, because Indian grid, according to all projections, require the maximum flexibility, and we firmly believe that integration of electric vehicles with the grid is one way of achieving that flexibility for the grid. And we also have, as most of you know, a very aggressive program of renewable energy. India is the only major economy which has achieved the Paris Agreement's target for 2030. We achieved that 8 years in advance. That is 40% of the electricity being generated from non-fossil fuel resources. And we have now enhanced our renewable energy target for 2030 to 500 gigawatt, of which a large share of it is expected to come from rooftop systems. And the integration of that rooftop systems with the low voltage and medium voltage require huge amount of flexibility on the grid, and that can be supported by integration of electric vehicles. So I stop here and I give a warm welcome to all the participants, and I request Ashima to introduce all the speakers and moderator and the team presenter. Over to you, Ashima.
Yes, sir. Thank you for giving the welcome remarks and setting the context for everyone. Moving forward, now I would request Mr. Rodney McGee to give the theme presentation on the grid integrated vehicles. Mr. Rodney McGee leads an engineering group at the University of Delaware to develop technology and standards for vehicle-based distributed energy resources, and more broadly, transportation electrification. He has engineered solutions for real-world distributed storage demonstration projects in North America, Europe, and Asia. Over to you, Rodney.
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Okay. So I've been introduced. I'll skip that. I'll talk a little bit about our group, what we do here at the university. So one of our competencies is in engineering. We have designed and implemented electronics both for onboard and off-board the vehicle. In addition, what's kind of unique about our group is we have people who work on policy. And because, as I'll talk about with grid integrated vehicle, you know, you're basically colliding two major industries together, and the amount of regulatory challenges to overcome is a lot. Just as a background, this has sort of been introduced, but yeah, we published the first paper on it. We started doing backfeeding into the grid with EVs in 2007. What we do with a lot of these projects is many times we'll do some testing of some early prototypes for OEMs. We'll work on advanced research projects. We also do standards development and sort of prove things out before they get standardized. We also work with partners, grid side, vehicle side, to provide feedback. Since we have a site here where we can actually operate vehicles doing V2G, there's also an opportunity for that. In addition, we still do some demonstration projects in a variety of locations, but for us, it's at this point, it's less about demonstrating it and more about removing barriers to mass market adoption. All right, next. Okay, so the concept has basically been introduced, but it becomes increasingly important to have grid integrated vehicles, in that they are the most cost-effective way to increase renewables and therefore also increase the required storage without significantly increasing the cost. Certainly, this is true in the United States, where there is a large amount of private vehicle ownership, and a significant part of those vehicles stay parked for long periods of time. These also provide dynamic loads for the grid so that electric vehicles which are inherently smart can charge when electricity is more available. And we focus on, for us, the technology, if it's not cost effective, isn't viable. In other words, there are obviously disadvantages to having a dual use resource. And if your dual use resource costs as much as a standalone resource, then you're not getting the benefit of using electric vehicles. And so we'll get into that because some of the technology decisions have an impact on the cost. So I mentioned this a little bit, but the regulatory boundaries in most countries between what are typically at the very highest levels of government regulated by different entities, which are, the people who maintain the grid and the people who regulate vehicles. They tend to be very different. There is very little multidisciplinary knowledge and people that are very knowledgeable about vehicles and that are also knowledgeable about the grid. And sometimes there's inherent conflict with the use of vehicles in their use case for transportation and as a grid resource. And the two stakeholders may have different interests in which to prioritize. And so basically, when you look at the tip of your charging connector, that's where there's a huge difference in regulatory boundaries. So those are some of the practical difficulties. Just as an overview, two main types of systems. You either connect primarily to the vehicle just as a battery, in the case of a DC system, and all of the equipment is off board. That has several advantages. In the case of CHAdeMO, they were able to demonstrate vehicle to grid, vehicle to home technologies long before they were done in other standards because, when the equipment is on the charger, the sort of system integration problems become more contained to that piece of equipment. And also interconnecting that piece of equipment is more aligned with traditional regulatory boundaries. So if the permanently installed piece of equipment is also the one with the inverter, it sort of fits the way we think about grid resources today. And then you just have to think of you still have many of the same problems of the vehicle has the dual use and there are still those challenges, but a lot of the OEMs also don't have to do very much. They simply have to offer their vehicle. You have to address problems of battery wear and concerns about drivers, but on the technology side, on the vehicle, it's much more minimal. But on the AC side, the vast majority of miles driven is from AC charging. Certainly in the United States, it's higher. It's in the high 90 percentile. And so one thing to think about is what is the typical use case for a DC fast charge and this was, Reggie kind of talked about this at a high level, which is with DC, you plug in, you fill, you go. Certainly there are exceptions to that, with vehicle to home systems that people have. But with AC, just in general, people spend an order of magnitude longer plugged in. That represents an opportunity for a grid integrated vehicle. And so to think, for a long time, there was this concept that anything advanced is DC and anything old-fashioned is AC. But when you look at some of the newest vehicle technologies coming out this year, and I'll touch a little bit about this. When the OEMs have decided to really invest in electrification, they're going to want to offer features that the vehicle is able to do even when it's away from home. So when you look at features that are being offered by many manufacturers now, such as vehicle to load, vehicle to vehicle, if you want to be able to take your electric vehicle off site, whether it's at a work site or camping, or if you want to sell vehicles where vehicles do the function, they're making those onboard chargers bidirectional. And so my argument is both will exist. There is no one that will win. As long as there are onboard chargers, onboard vehicles, there's an opportunity to make those bidirectional. There's always going to be higher power available on the DC side for size and constraints, but as long as that onboard charger is there, the bidirectional version is not fundamentally different in terms of volume and weight. So let's talk about some unsolved technical issues with VDG that I don't think many people have considered. I certainly haven't talked about this in a session, but having done demonstration projects for over a decade with vehicle to grid, what you quickly realize is that in order to successfully implement a VDG system, it must be more reliable than its unidirectional counterpart. Why is that? Well, whether it's AC or DC, if it's unidirectional, you plug in, you charge up to full. Maybe there's a delay in start, but that's not typical. Most of the time you plug in, you do some charging, and then you shut down. All the energy moves in one direction. Charge sessions are typically much shorter than a VDG session. Energy is always moving into the battery, right? So if you have an issue during charging, at least you don't lose energy. If your charge session is short and it's cut off after an hour, you've at least done an hour worth of charging. If it's bidirectional and you take from the battery, it has to be reliable enough to operate through all of that time and have correct coordination with the schedule to make sure the vehicle's charged. This is very different than the way DC fast charge CCS-based systems are used today. People typically drive their vehicle to a location where they do DC fast charging. They plug in. If it doesn't work the first time, they plug it in again because they're right there. If it stops charging after 30 minutes for some problem, they're probably still there, waiting or nearby. It's very different than the cases that we do where the vehicle will be plugged in whenever it's parked. And so, in many of the existing CCS systems, they don't have mechanisms to retry if there's an error while charging. The DIN spec implementations that we live with today, and even some of the newer versions, there are many off ramps to stop charging. So if sort of anything happens, you stop. They're kind of, and the problem with that is if a customer has a unidirectional version and then they get the bidirectional version and it's less reliable because it's operating for 10 times longer, so just the probability of having a problem is higher. It will be rejected by the consumers. Okay, and just to give you an idea where we are with the state of the art, this was a study published by I put the link down there. It's some Berkeley researchers out in California, where they visited 657 CCS DC fast charges, and some of these aren't connector broken. Obviously, I care about that, but charge system initialization failure, where charge sessions either didn't start or were cut short, was 6.4%. That is unacceptable in a VDG use case where maybe initially you're taking power from the vehicle. And so this is definitely something that has to be addressed before there'll be wide adoption of the standards. Next slide. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I couldn't necessarily say this, but the situation where we are with onboard bidirectional is much different. I'll give two examples. Just a few months ago, Hyundai announced that their Ioniq 5 vehicles would have onboard chargers, which were bidirectional for vehicle to X. This includes both off-grid and on-grid modes. So those are, modes where it's, tied to the grid, but also modes where it's off-grid, either for emergency power or for supplying voltage to one load. If you look at suppliers, there's a Japanese supplier, Diamond Electric. They made an announcement in 2020 that they were starting work on a onboard charger that was bidirectional for V to X. Again, that's the both on-grid and off-grid cases. And there are large, at this point, there are vehicles from a half a dozen manufacturers that offer power out of the charge port for emergency uses, for vehicle to load. These are only going to become more common. We have worked with many tier 1 manufacturers. Their bidirectional versions of their onboard chargers are not significantly different from their unidirectional versions. Most of the work is there's some hardware involved with like filtering, and then most of the work is in developing the software to control the onboard switch, the DSP controls for the switching of transistors to basically make them bidirectional. Many of the things you need for active power factor correction are also the things you need to do bidirectional. Okay, I want to touch on standards for a bit as I sort of wrap things up in the next few minutes. One of the problems, many of you are familiar with a recent publication or expected publication of 15118-20. One of the issues for this for AC V2G is, as I've kind of made this analogy before, is at least in terms of AC V2G, -20 kind of has what I call the computer science approach to V2G, not the electrical engineering approach. What do I mean by that? Well, they have signals to tell the car to charge and discharge, but they don't have any of the messages you need to have the vehicle be grid compatible. And so in Europe, they call it a grid code. Different locations will have voltage and frequency settings. In places like California, we have things like volt-var curves. These are location specific. They're different for microgrids. And so those settings are on the grid, on the EVSE, and they need to be transferred to the vehicle. None of those settings are transferred by -20, which means the vehicle can't be configured for correct operation. These are the kinds of things that when you commission a solar PV inverter, these would be the settings that would be set up in there. Another big problem with the standards is when you look at the electrical safety side of things, this is what's part of the EVSE standards like 61851-1, is there are not requirements for what a bidirectional AC EVSE needs to meet. In that document, the work has just begun. There's been the first couple of meetings in the last month or so, but it'll be quite some time before edition 4 of -1 comes out because the work hasn't been ongoing for that particular area. And so while you may have a message to charge and discharge for AC V2G and -20, you certainly don't have any of the other signals to facilitate the interconnection of an AC vehicle. One standard that sort of tackled that is SAE J3072. It solves the issue of the roaming grid-tied inverter. This is a new kind of device, an inverter that their emergency generators are roaming, but they're not grid-tied. So a roaming grid-tied inverter basically is we have this two-part device. We have the EVSE, which has all the local grid knowledge and it knows what you need to be compliant here. And then when the vehicle plugs in, the settings are transferred over. The so-called grid code settings are transferred over. And also there's a standard that's going to be published this year, UL 1741SC, that describes what the requirements are for an AC bidirectional EVSE. I just want to mention J3072 isn't tied to a specific implementation, so it works with J1772 with PLC. It works with SAJ 3068 with LNCP. Okay, so any questions or comments? But otherwise, thanks for the presentation.
We will come to the Q&A at the end of the panel. We would request you to
Cool.
stay back, Rodney. I hope you can. Thank you. Over to you, Ashima, for the speaker's introduction.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Rodney, for the theme presentation. We'll be starting with a panel discussion now. Here's a quick look at the esteemed panelists. The session will be moderated by Mr. Girish Gatikar. Mr. Gatikar is the advisor at India Smart Grid Forum and an energy leader, Electric Vehicle Digital Business Technologies, General Motors. Mr. Gatikar was also the Chief Research Officer at Green Lots and led the development of electric vehicle grid and battery storage integrated system. Girish Katikar's work has appeared in over 75 publications, and he's regularly asked to speak at events and conduct training related to clean transportation and clean energy. Welcome, sir.
Seema, you can hear me, right?
Yes, yes. For the panel discussion, we have Ms. Catherine Lucas Haley. Catherine is an interdisciplinary researcher based in Melbourne with 15 years of experience spanning all manner of energy-related things. She has a PhD in architectural science from the University of Queensland. More recently, she was responsible for delivering ChargeFox ultra-rapid EV charging network in Western Australia, South Australia, and Victoria. Catherine is currently working on the REVS project, delivering the social science stream. Welcome, ma'am. Mr. Randhir Singh, who's the director at Electric Mobility Niti Ayog. Randhir Singh is currently working to transform transport mobility in India. He's working on initiatives to remove the hurdles of high finance costs for EV manufacturing as well as adoption. He is also involved with projects with World Bank and leading finance providers in this country. He is extending his valuable support in the direction of decarbonizing the transport sector, including the option of hydrogen in some segments. Welcome, sir. We have Ms. Lonike Dressen-Mutters, who's the Director, Standardization Open Charge Alliance. She is responsible for the EV charging testing facilities, open standard development in secure EV charging, and is in charge of activities regarding the Open Charge Alliance and eClearing.net. Welcome, Ms. Lonike. We have Mr. Rodney McGee as a panelist. Once again, we welcome you, sir, and Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai as one of the panelists. Welcome once again, sir. Now, I request Mr. Girish to take the discussion forward.
Seema, thank you for that excellent introduction. So we'll jump into the session here. Great presentation, Rodney. Rodney and earlier remarks has set the stage for the whole area of electric vehicles, right? So when we talk about electric vehicles, we talk about how it's kind of inextricably linked with the electric grid. So that's what the topic is going to be, how electric vehicles can be a great resource to electric grid. The term grid friendly has also been used extensively. So this panel for the next 40 minutes will talk about and discuss about how electric vehicles can be integrated with the grid and how they can be managed, right? So what we will do in this panel is instead of making it a very presentation heavy, we are going to ask each of the panelists to speak for 3 minutes. We do have a couple of more panelists joining today. So I sincerely request all the panelists to keep it for 3 minutes or less. So you can jump into a little bit of more interactive discussions. And then we will walk into, a moderated set of questions. But before we jump into a moderated set of questions, I would like to kind of walk a quick 1-minute overview of the context. We are in the Asia Clean Energy Forum session, and thanks to India Smart Grid Forum arranging this very important topic on understanding how EVs can be a great resource. It's important to understand the Asian region, right, when we talk about grid integrated vehicles. And I would like to highlight 4 very important context setting features that it would be great if panelists keep them in mind during the presentations and see how their grid integrated vehicle experiences and suggestions can be more related. First and the foremost, a lot of countries in Asia have a predominant fuel that is based on fossil generation, although they have very aggressive renewable energy. Take, for example, India, right? 80% of India's demand is still being met by coal, oil, and solid biomass. Okay, although India has committed and enhanced its renewable target for 500 gigawatts by 2030. That's number one, the predominance of fossil-based generations. The second one is relatively low per capita metrics, with specifically for energy use, and a significant growth forecast. When you look at from per capita basis, India's energy use and emissions are less than half the world's average, okay, and are indicators for vehicle ownership. So there's a significant growth potential, and we're seeing that. Third, and the important one, is an expanding population with unique electric vehicle ownership needs that has very high cost sensitivity, addressing the worsening air quality issues, and also in the middle of these global crisis we're having, the energy security aspects, right? So when you look at the example here, the Asian cities rank top among the air pollutions in the world, and India's net dependence on imported oil rises about 90% by 2040. This is to as per the International Energy Agency forecast. It's around 75% today. As we go into the last and the most important topic that might be related to this, also more related to this particular topic, is the need for robust grids and reliable and sustainable electricity supply. We do know in a lot of countries there is a very high T&D and commercial losses and a very unreliable supply that is kind of compensated through fossil-based backup resources like diesel generation. So keep those 4 in mind: predominant fossil-based generation, low per capita metrics, unique population with cost sensitivities, etc., for electric vehicle adoption, and the grid that has a tremendous potential to be modernized. With that, I will request each of the panelists to come and give their prepared remarks. I'll call upon the panelists. We'll start with Catherine Lucas-Healy. Hi, Catherine. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to give a little introduction to our REVS project, which stands for Realising Electric Vehicle to Grid Services. It's a real-world trial of 51 Nissan Leafs in the Australian national energy market. At the time it was launched, I think it was the largest V2G trial in the world, but I think we've been pipped since then. We have been working through, so the project includes the whole sort of chain of vehicle to grid, from the OEM, the charging provider, fleet provider, the retailer, the network, the Australian National University, who are providing research and integration through our Distributed Energy Resource Lab, and also the Australian Capital Territory Government, whose fleet 50 of those cars are. And what we've found in the project is V2G is really complicated to get working in practice. Initially, we had intended, the project was designed to participate in different parts of the frequency markets in Australia. And a lot of the work that we've had to do is adapting the charger. We've been using the Wallbox Quasar for the Australian grid connection standards. We have our own grid connection standard in Australia and New Zealand, which has been quite difficult because it is different from the European standards that the wallboxes were built for, as well as the grid connection requirements the requirements to participate in the Australian market. And as we've gone, things have taken a long time, and the markets that we're able to participate in have kind of reduced as well. This is in the context in Australia of we have a need for, so we've got lots and lots of rooftop solar, lots of renewable energy being deployed at a world leading rate. We've got coal plants that are unreliable and are shutting down earlier than expected. So we have a need for the firming of renewables as they're coming in very quickly. And just this week, we have an enormous amount of volatility in the market as well in Australia that we've never actually seen before since the market was put in place. So there's lots of change, lots of uncertainty. There's definitely a definite role for vehicle grid integration, but there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of work to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. We will reserve the questions in the end. Really appreciate those remarks. Very interesting comment. V2G is very complicated in practice. We'll touch upon that topic in a moment. It hasn't been any different experience, at least here, with some successes as well as we speak. Our second speaker for today is Mr. Ranadhir Singh, who is the Director of Electric Mobility at Niti Aayog in India. Over to you, Ranadhir.
Thank you, Harish, and thank you, Get Smart Grid Forum, for having me here. In fact, this is a very, it's not premature that this topic has come up, and in fact, if we are going to address this now, this will lead us to the future wherein even the vehicle-to-grid integration will be part of our ecosystem, EV ecosystem. Since the beginning, we are at just the initial stages. So first of all, EVs are as much green as the green electricity powering them, that is renewables. And to manage large-scale integration of renewable energy into the Indian power grid, the requirements start from validating technologies and solutions to support grid integration through pilots and the demonstrations, while building a foundation for the sound policy, capacity building in government of India agencies, and incentivizing private sector engagement. The additional energy consumption from EVs will not represent a critical factor for DSOs on immediate basis. However, EVs can cause a significant higher peak demand, which may trigger network upgrades unless load management strategies are employed. The impact on the peak load will be critically dependent on how congestion is managed. If all EVs start to charge at the same hour, the impact will be much higher. However, the power quality issues could be primarily addressed through these four things which are marked in one of the reports. It's like automated and controlled tap changers on DT, capacitor banks, static compensators, and combining decentralized battery storage systems coupled with the charging infrastructure to act as a local source of power. Factors such as the charging capacity required, preference of users for mode of charging, slow or fast, and the total EV load will depend on various geographical, technical, and the transportation parameters, of course. Appropriate site selection and the capacity determination of EVSE is a critical step to building a successful e-mobility ecosystem. And also prioritization of the EVSE location. It would depend on the spare capacity in the DTs, distribution transformers, in the feeders connecting the EVSE stations. Now, there are certain steps which has already been taken. For example, the building bylaws have been changed and notified by the MoRTH, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. This would help in creating the infra, upcoming places, and hence the DT level solutions. In January 2022, this year, Ministry of Power has also released revised guidelines and issued a detailed note on charging infrastructure. One important point out of that is grid flexibility and managing the requirement. So tying up with at least one online network service provider to enable advanced remote and online booking of charging slots by EV owners. Such online information to EV owners will also include the information about the location, types, and the number of chargers installed or available. This would actually help to manage the requirement on immediate basis. And India has clearly articulated its commitment to reducing GHG emissions. The use of EVs can be a viable option for meeting these commitments. While reducing India's dependence on imported fuel, the transition towards EV is one of the most promising pathways to simultaneously increase energy security, reduce oil imports, lower GHG emissions, and improve air quality. And as I said in the beginning, EVs are as green as the power which is feeding them. That's it, Rishi, from my side. As we go on, let's have this conversation further.
Wonderful. Thank you, Randhir. Hit all the key 4 points that I had mentioned are very relevant to Asian countries. Excellent work there. And also your point on the peak demand load, and management of grid reliability is important, and some of the great initiatives that Ministry of Power has taken, at the national scale, which always amazes me, the ability to leapfrog. So thank you for that great background. We'll move to our next panelist or speaker. That's Lonika Dreisen-Mutters, who is the Director for Standardization at Open Charge Alliance. Over to you, Lonika.
Thank you, Rish. So I've prepared a few slides, not too many, because I will keep a close track of the time.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. So my name is Lonika Dreisen and I work for the Open Charge Alliance, which is a standards organization standardizing the information exchange between the charging station and the back office system. And the name of that standard is OCPP. So at the Open Charge Alliance, we are currently adding vehicle-to-X, vehicle-to-grid support to this new protocol, OCPP. You see here a diagram where you can see the different icons where OCPP is located. And what is important for you to know is that the vehicle-to-grid support of OCPP will be vehicle protocol agnostic. So some vehicles use a protocol called CHAdeMO, other vehicles are implementing the new protocol called ISO 15118-20. And for OCPP, it doesn't matter which of the two protocols the vehicle speaks. So the use cases we currently have under development, some of them are already done, some are almost done, are what you see here on the slide. And they are all the sub-flavors of vehicle-to-grid. So you can use the bidirectional power flow for multiple purposes, whether it's frequency control of the grid or frequency support or voltage support or inductive power support. Can all be all different types of things. So that is what we're working on. Also on the offline situation, because not always charging stations are online and connected to the back office. So, and of course, we want to support vehicle-to-grid also in that situation. What's important for us is that the definition of vehicle-to-grid is backwards compatible with the version 2.1, which is the latest version. We notice that in the industry there is a demand for backwards compatibility, so that's what we're focusing on. So, of course, as you all know, that utilities all over the world, they need to ensure grid stability. And in this picture, you see with all the actors, the charging station, the electric vehicle, but also the charging station operator. You also have the utility company that plays a role. For many years now, I think for 8 years, OCPP supports smart charging, which will help utilities with integrating vehicles into their grid. And they can smart charge or send their request for charging profiles to the charging station operator, to the vehicles using the telematics route, or to the energy management system that maybe some businesses or customers have at their premises. But what we see in our industry is that utilities are becoming more and more vocal about their desire to directly control charging sessions to balance the electricity grid. So they not only want to have interaction with other players, but they want to directly control the session. And of course, that is logical because they see an increase in electric vehicles. The megawatt charging system is on the horizon, where you can charge with 1 megawatt and more. So those types of loads are quite big, especially if you think of a logistics center where a lot of trucks are parked at the same time. Can be up to 50 megawatts of truck charging at one location. And if you combine that with vehicle-to-grid, these massive truck batteries are also, of course, capable of feeding back into the grid. That, of course, makes sense that utilities say, oh, wait, if this is happening, I want to have some control because it's my responsibility to keep the grid stable. So I need to be involved. There are some examples of direct access to the charger by utilities. One example is a project in my own country, in the Netherlands, called Grid Shield. In California, you have a rule which also expresses the need for control by utilities of the inverters, whether they are at a wind farm or whether they are in a vehicle. And there are many examples where utilities are using their smart meter interface to control the charging sessions at the charging stations. So it's understandable. It's happening all over the world. And there, as you know, there are many different utilities. So the utility market is very diverse, if you put it in a positive view, or very fragmented if you have a more negative view on utilities. So what we are currently doing is work in progress. So we understand, of course, that utilities want to have control over the charging sessions, but how do we make OCPP agnostic globally? So OCPP is currently recommended in Europe, I believe also in India. It is required for government funding in Korea and California. It is required in the Netherlands for public charging. It is proposed currently by the US government for government funding. This was announced last week. So all over the world, OCPP is used, but of course, all over the world, there are different utilities with different grid codes, with different development speeds, with different needs. So how do we make this work for everybody using the same protocol, OCPP? It is really important that if you look at direct utility control, that it also works for the CSOs and the OEMs and also the EV drivers, because if it doesn't work for them, of course, it will not get adopted, it will just not work. And this will frustrate either their operations, or it will frustrate the introduction of V2X, the introduction of renewables. And that is, of course, all what we don't want. We want vehicle to grid, we want EV adoption, we want renewable integration. So we should make it work for everyone, the utilities, but also the EV charging industry. So at the moment, it's not an easy puzzle to solve, but at the moment, we think that our design principles should be configurability. So it should be configurable how to address it, because Korea may not be the same as the Netherlands, may not be the same as the Philippines. The grid code may be different, so it should be configurable. What is important that at least all actors are notified if there is some sort of a control. And we are currently working with a lot of OCA members to make sure that we get it right. And as the previous speaker mentioned, and the one before, it's not an easy puzzle, but we will need to fix it because it's too important. Thank you.
Excellent, Monica. Thank you for that great overview of OCPP. I think, we worked extensively for a long time, and we continue to do that. It's always amazing when I think about and see the presentations every time, how interconnected the entire electric vehicle ecosystem is, right? It's not just about electric vehicles anymore. So great presentation in terms of providing those linkages and why standards play a very critical role in those interoperability. So to make sure we can have this ecosystem as a connected ecosystem and as a great resource. So thank you for that excellent presentation. We'll move to our next panelist, Rodney McGee, who you just heard before the start of the panel, a great presentation on some of the work that he is doing at University of Delaware here in the US. Over to you, Rodney.
Yeah, I won't add too much since I already spoke for quite some time, but I will mention that the reliability issue that I've discussed earlier is also as important as it is for consumer. If we want to electrify transportation, we can't offer a solution that is less reliable than diesel, right? And currently, currently a lot of the infrastructure, for various reasons, not all of it technical, the vehicles themselves are reliable. Getting the energy into the vehicles when it needs to be continues to be a challenge. My focus, since focusing in the earlier early 2000s on a lot of demonstration projects for passenger cars. In the last 5 years, I've really focused on medium and heavy duty because that certainly in the most countries, EV adoption starts with passenger cars more before it starts with commercial vehicles. And the commercial expectations for reliability are another order of magnitude more reliable. And many people have the naive assumption that they can take the standards they've made for passenger cars and just push them over to the commercial side and they will accept them the way they are. I will say that probably consumers are more forgiving about having to plug in their car twice. Many workers, but plug in and walk away. It's not their problem. So things need to be very reliable. And I think that is a big challenge to the electrification of transportation.
Excellent, Rodney. Thank you for those important remarks. Stressing on the reliability, you also mentioned the need to expand from the light and medium duty to possibly the heavy duty, like buses and trucks, for example. In fact, I also remember working with India Smart Grid Forum 3-4 years ago when we did one of the very groundbreaking study in Kolkata, looking at the transportation electrification for public sector, right? And one of the key finding is, how the electric vehicles are more cost effective than its internal combustion engine counterparts. Not only that, but also in terms of how can we make them very, reliable contributor to the grid resource. So that I think is an excellent point. I certainly look forward to hearing more from you on that topic. So our next speaker needs no introduction. It's Reggie Kumar Pillai, who is the president of India Smart Grid Forum and also the chairman of the Global Smart Energy Federation. Over to you, Reggie.
Thank you, Girish, and thank you other speakers for the excellent introductions. It really amazes me how last 5 years the whole topic of V2G has changed. Traditionally, EV manufacturers have not offered this facility. Although 20 years ago, Shadow specified about two-way charging, but none of the Japanese car manufacturers or any car manufacturers offered that facility, mainly because the warranty of the battery. The EV manufacturers were not the battery manufacturers. They typically outsource the batteries from a battery manufacturer who given a warranty for the number of cycles. So if he has given a warranty for 5,000 cycles or 8,000 cycles, and that cycle, every charge and discharge is counted in that. So a electric vehicle manufacturer to the customer, to the owner, gives the V2G facility, and we do charging and discharging 10 times a day, and that warranty will expire in no time. So as a result, typical EVs did not offer this facility. I have seen V2G only in universities, like in University of Delaware, University of California in San Diego. They had one of the second largest fleet after University of Delaware. So, and UCLA at the Smart Energy Research Lab at the UCLA, etc. So it had not come to industry. Only pilots existed till 2018. In fact, end of 2017 or early 2018, University of Warwick published a white paper. That is a very interesting paper that talked about V2G trials around the world and the battery performance in the vehicles where the batteries subjected to V2G, what happened to them in their longevity. So they said that if the charging is controlled with shallow, between 50% to 80%, never allow the discharge go below 50, and typically keep between 60 to 80. And in that range, if you operate it, actually that will, in the current the NMC and LFP kind of battery chemistries, that's going to act as a, it's going to give a massaging effect, and in fact, instead of decreasing the life of the battery, it will extend the life of the battery. That reminded me of my interaction at UCSD a year earlier when I visited UCSD, and the man who was running the show there, the EV program, Girish, we all know him, Vashan Byron. So he said that out of 7 of his vehicles which were Nissan Leafs, which are part of the V2G program, their batteries were going well even after 5-6 years. But 2-3 vehicles, the same fleet which they bought, which are not part of V2G pilot project, after 4 years, they had to change the batteries. But the one which you are actually participating in the V2G, the batteries were still going well. So, and even that point in time, further interactions with EV manufacturers around the world, nobody had the courage or conviction that V2G will be made a standard feature in the vehicles. But in the last 2 years, everything changed. All the EV manufacturers now talking not just V2G, they're talking about V2X. You take power out from the battery and use it for anything. You can use it for camping, you can use it for running any of your appliances, you can run your equipment at home. So this change been never expected to happen in such short time. So all the new models which is going to be released in 2022 and 2023 are all have this V2X facility, and this is going to be a standard feature in all new EVs in the times to come. And in Delhi particularly, we have been advocating for V2G with the AC charger, and we wanted to do a demonstration project. Recently, early this year, we have applied for a small grant under one of the programs to do a V2G demonstration project in Delhi, and that too we got the support from the Regulatory Commission of Delhi and Electricity Regulatory Commission. We are going to do this in their premise. They have given a supporting letter that this will be done in their own premise in Delhi, and we are tied up with the University of Delaware, and the technology which they have perfected over a decade is what we are going to try out here. We hope that grant comes soon and we do the pilot demonstration here successfully, and which will be there for all the regulators and our policymakers to see and evaluate, and we will come out with policies and standards so that V2G can become a standard feature in the country. Thank you.
Excellent, Reggie. Thank you. I really appreciate some of those background. A couple of things. The battery management, optimization of battery management that you mentioned is a very important factor. Me working with General Motors, one of the largest OEM in the, globally, we are looking at that. V2G mentioned as a standard features in the EVs. Some of the vehicles that are being released here in the United States and also in China are V2G capable. In fact, the new electric truck called Chevy Silverado has V2X capabilities natively built into it. So you can use that for powering your homes, for example, or potentially using it for powering the grid as well. So great news. Moving away from the pilot decades ago, University of Delaware pioneers and other research work. In fact, I had done at Berkeley Lab as well in my previous employment, vehicle to grid as a microgrid at the LA Air Force Base here in California. So a long way that we have come, and how the OEMs and the market is picking up. So excellent points. I certainly look forward to that grant in India for V2G pilots. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for another leapfrog in India if you're able to successfully demonstrate that this is going to be a very effective way to address India's reliability in a very sustainable manner. So with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their excellent remarks. We do have some questions coming in from the audience, and thank you for sending all those questions and continue to do so. Let's kind of focus a little bit on some prepared questions we had to really address some critical points, specifically targeting the panel focus today on the grid integrated vehicles and also the focus on Asia, right? So from the perspective of as a regulator government, right, on the side, I think we have Mr. Randir Singh representing that, and also Reggie representing some of the public-private sector aspects. What are some, the policy mentions were quite a bit in the presentations or the remarks that folks made. Can you explain, both Randir and Reggie, what are some of the policy interventions that are required for EVs to play a critical role in demand and grid flexibility?
Okay, Rish. So, Rish, actually in 2017, the Indian government released its policy document on transformative for all. It has a vision for the future of India's mobility system. Wherein the third phase, which comes between 2024 to 32, envisages the full-scale expansion along with the introduction of the regulatory mechanisms to capture full grid value of EVs. Now, what has to be done immediately is the distribution utilities need to analyze the impact of EV charging on the distribution network. For example, the distribution transformer loading, increasing ohmic losses, accelerated degradation of the network components, and identify appropriate locations of EV charging stations to support EV charging while minimizing the physical network impacts. That actually addresses the grid flexibility part. Now, from the demand part, right now, owners may charge their electric vehicles at their residences, offices, using their existing electricity connections. This MOP has already said very clearly. And as the aggregate load of EVs will increase, utilities need to address a couple of issues. And the primary among them is the impact on distribution and the grid infra. So rather than increasing the capacity of the distribution grid, shifting the load to times of day when the grid is underutilized is an effective means of providing additional electricity without investing in the grid upgrades on an immediate basis. And second is the impact on the power procurement. And one of the benefits of EVs is increased electricity sales, but with growing penetration of the renewables. It is economic to procure cheaper off-peak power over expensive peak power. And the shift demand to times of day when electricity rates are lower. So in addition to this, as variable renewables increase their share of the power supply, there would be an increasing need to match flexible loads like EVs to the available supply. So what I think is the utilities will need to adopt several strategies to address these impacts, like increasing load factor to avoid the need for expanded infrastructure and align EV charging load with supply. From the policy perspective, one is the guidelines which addresses many issues from the charging and the grid side has been issued by the MOP. And in addition to that, more from the building side is also addressing some of the issues. So overall, this actually addresses the demand and the grid flexibility part. Nevertheless, this is not enough as of now, and we need to work further from the standards side also. So wherein BIS and DST also needs to pitch in, and in fact, ISGF can also play a great role in that.
Excellent. Thank you, Randhir, for that. Reggie? Yeah.
Thanks, Randhir, for your support. You've been very active in the DST and the BIS initiatives as well. So we have been interacting with the policymakers right from the beginning on the electric mobility, right from the electric mobility plan was released in 2013 onwards. So one of the things we realized that the charging station operators, the charging station, because of the low penetration of the electric vehicle, those who come in, invest in the charging station, they will not have enough of revenue for sustainability. We need to subsidize the electric vehicle charging. If somebody take a 100 kilowatt load for a public charging station and no vehicle comes to charge for several days, he end up paying that fixed charge. That 100 kilowatt into fixed charge per month is a very much bigger money to be paid to the utility than the energy charges which we will be able to even collect in a month in the initial days. So realizing these things, we went to the regulatory commission. Basically, we have the very complex regulatory mechanism. Every state has its own regulatory commission and a central electricity regulatory commission, which particularly deal in not into the distribution side, more into generation and transmission. So, but a good thing is that all of them together, the 29, 30 regulatory commissions together, their chairman of all these commissions, they have a statutory forum called Forum of Regulators. And they used to meet earlier once in 2 months. Now they meet every month. And whatever decided and minuted in FOR meetings are generally implemented in most of the states. So in 2016, we went to the CARC chairman, who is the chair of the FOR, requesting that we need a presentation slot to the FOR to sensitize the regulators about the electric mobility, which is coming fast, or which is going to get rolled out faster in the country. And we need a presentation to create a new tariff slab in the electricity. So it's a concessional tariff slab, which will be only energy charges, no capacity charges, at least in the initial years. So there was a huge resistance from everybody saying that in a country where majority of the electricity, 80-90% coming from the thermal power plants, electric mobility really doesn't mean clean transportation. So you are only pushing the pollution to the countryside. So it took several meetings to convince them that it is not exactly so. You could always mandate if electric mobility is going to consume a million kilowatt hour of electricity a day, you please mandate that 1 million kilowatt hour should come from renewable energy over and above the ongoing renewable energy programs. So that's how finally the CRC agreed and given us a slot to present. So towards end of 2016, one of the FOR meetings we presented the need for a separate tariff slab, and Delhi was the first state which issued in 2017 a very concessional, almost half of the commercial rate. Delhi those days, the commercial rate was about 8.5 to 9 rupees, and they issued a tariff slab of 5 rupee 50 paise at the LT level charging, which they further reduced it to 4 rupee 50 paise and no capacity charges. Today, as we speak, in the last 5 years, almost all states, barring 2 or 3 states, all of them have a special tariff. Very few states have gone in for capacity charges, but all of them have concessional tariff. So the point I am driving here is that our regulators and policymakers are open to these new ideas, and if we work with them the right way, we'll be able to bring about policies and regulations that will support V2G. That's a very reason, even for the demonstration project, we approached the regulator in Delhi first and said that we would like to do it in your premise. And if you are convinced, you help us with the regulations, and the rest of the country regulators can come and see. So irrespective of whatever rules and regulations are written at the central level, end of the day, electricity in India is in the it's a concurrent list subject. So state government also need to agree and issue regulations. Then only it actually happens. So we have different challenges, but each one being addressed in a systematic fashion. And we hope we'll be one of the few countries where V2G becomes scaled up and legally accepted. And what would be the electric vehicle offering flexibility to the grid services? So that's an area where we need to work, and how to incentivize the EV owners to participate in the V2G programs. And also there are many examples. Actually, 2 days ago we had the jury meeting of ISGAN award, the International Smart Grid Action Network, which is a government-to-government network of 28 countries. So every year they give the best smart grid project an award. So we, from the Global Smart Energy Federation, we provide the jury panel for the ISGAN awards right from beginning. And the last 3 years, I chair the jury panel. Monday we had the meeting. This year, incidentally, for the 7th ISGAN award, the topic was V2G. And there are 11 applications from around the world, and some of the projects were really good. And we finalized this. This awards will be announced actually at the Clean Energy Ministerial, which will be held in Pittsburgh in 2022 September, the 3rd week of September. So there are many activities around this happening around the world, and we will be one of the first countries where we will do V2G through appropriate regulations and policies. And the point I wanted to mention about is that some of the places where some projects in US, some projects in Canada, some projects in Korea, which came in for this awards, they calculated how much of benefit each of the EV owner gets in a year. So one project from Canada, which they implemented in Toronto, they said that the potential of up to 8,000 Canadian dollar per year for an EV owner to get it as a incentive for participating in V2G. So I stop here.
Thank you, Reggie. Excellent points. What's happening in India, I'm sure, is a blueprint for many other countries in Asia as well, which have a similar governance structure in terms of the electricity regulations, etc. So the point you made on the pushing the policies so quickly, right, and the willingness for the regulators to be open-minded and listening to adopt some of the key policies is very recommendable, especially on some of the things that you mentioned is how EVs can also be green. I think Mr. Randeep Singh mentioned that as well. They're only as green as the source of generation, if I paraphrased him accurately. So those are the kind of things I think, even states like California in the United States is addressing. So, we have come up with something called as greenhouse gas emission signal, which allows the end users to really understand the amount of carbon content or the greenhouse gas content in the source of generation. It's mostly based on the operation side or the generation side of things, but it's a great start to really understand, hey, if I have the signals, not just the tariffs or prices, but also the renewable content in the grid, can you have more, managed charging that allows you to charge when there's a less greenhouse gas content in the grid? So it's an excellent point. So we'll walk into the next topic or next question. And this I would like to focus to both you, Catherine, and Rodney, mostly from the research community. You've done some groundbreaking work, have phenomenal experience of learning from those research demonstration. So can you explain us what are some of the key early stage demonstration results show the value of bidirectional charging or bidirectional capabilities in EVs?
Want me to start?
Catherine? Yeah, go ahead, Catherine. Yeah.
So at the very launch of our project, we did quite a crude calculation and estimated the value could be 1,000 Australian dollars per car per year. And I think it didn't take us very long to walk back from that value, and we haven't really brought it up since, for a number of reasons that I sort of touched on earlier as well. The first is the different markets that the EVs are able to participate in. In our electricity market, the faster response, the more lucrative the market. And what we've really found is that V2G is very much complicated by it being a retrofit technology that's installed in existing buildings, and that's placed constraints over how quickly the vehicles can respond to an event. Some of that response time has also come from the grid connection standard and also some of the market requirements. And so, as I sort of mentioned before, that's brought us back to the slower response part of the market. And so there was less value in that. But that doesn't mean that a future trial or a future sort of real world implementation of V2G wouldn't be able to do that. Ideally it would. The other dynamics that are going on is the value of the flexibility market is variable. The V2G setups in competition with grid scale batteries, with virtual power plants, using home batteries, as well as other sort of fast response technologies, potentially pumped hydro as well. So there's not an unlimited pool of value that's available there, and there's a first mover advantage involved. And so that's brought a lot of uncertainty in that aspect as well. So at this point, I think the jury's very much out. Theoretically, there's a lot of value, but the real practicalities kind of give us a real reality check when it comes to that. So, and I think the more uncertain it is, the bigger a challenge it is to have people choose to adopt V2G, which is a really big part of the problem, which I think Rodney sort of mentioned before, the importance of just being able to sort of trust the technology, which I think's really massive. So yeah, there's a lot of problems to solve, and I think that it needs to have not just the focus on sort of, the market and the standards and the technology, but thinking about what realistically EV owners will opt into participating in.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. We'll come back to some topics and comments you made with respect to the value and some of the challenges and problems we had to solve. So excellent points. Rodney, any quick thoughts from you?
Yeah, so when we first did backfeeding in 2007, I will say that we were very lucky in that all the people who have made demonstration projects in California very different, are very difficult, did not do that to us. So I always say that energy policy in California is blood sport. It's serious. There are only a few major utilities. The market is very complicated. It's changing. When we did our demonstration projects dating back then, we were able to do the project as ideally as possible in terms of the regulatory issues. And because we weren't hampered by existing standards, we were able to write an implementation that was completely focused on doing the fast response frequency regulation, and we focused on that all the way through, so we could get those we could respond in less than a second to everything. And we if there was a regulation that didn't allow us to do what we wanted, we got an exception and told them that it can't work if it's like this, as opposed to many of the projects. And there was a project, very famous project, early V2G project, Air Force Base LA, out in California, where they were forced to install a $50,000 utility grade meter for really no reason. They just wanted to meet all the regulations. They felt it was more important to show that they could meet the existing regulations than to envision how it could work for EVs. And luckily at that time frame, everyone was very willing to make it happen how it should work to be efficiently. If you don't have that, and you have rule makers that are focused on, it's kind of ironic. If you keep saying we have to do it a standard way and we have to follow all the regulations that exist today, you will often find you will not end up with a cost optimized solution. It may be optimized for someone. It may be optimized for the person working at the at PJM that doesn't have to change anything, or the person working at the local inspector who doesn't have to change his interconnection form, but it doesn't make it easier to realize it. So that's the biggest thing I would say, is that these situations will have to change to allow EVs to participate efficiently rather than the other way around.
Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate that. Some of the comments you made about the California regulations of blood sport. I have a lot of scars. I won't show them. Working with the regulators and policymakers out here in California myself, and also the point you made on the Air Force Base V2G pilot. That was in 2013, 2014, because part of my team, and I was at Berkeley Lab, working on a pilot project LA. It was a unique experience. Certainly transitioning from those lessons from each of the demonstrations a lot of folks have done here and outside as well, and how do we transition them to regulations, make it more simple and cost effective. I think those are all excellent points. Well, I know we kind of running behind our schedule. Reggie and Asima, we do have another 10 minutes or so, right? We can continue.
There are some questions audience posted. So
that's what I wanted to focus on. Yeah. But before that, Reggie, before the audience question, but can we go for another 10 minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so let me ask one question to Launika. I haven't touched her, in terms of a very important topic that she mentioned on the OCPP and standardization integration, right? So Launika, if I understand correctly, a lot of deployments right now are based on OCPP version 1.6. A lot of charge point operators that are already deploying OCPP in many different countries. And also know that the most recent version of OCPP is version 2.0.1. Can you describe some of your plans on what are the work that you're doing for formal international standardization of OCPP 2.01?
So as you may know, OCPP started, I think, in 2010. So it was very early days. And the version that is deployed most widely at the moment is 1.6, and that version was published in 2015. So what you should consider is that a standard published in 2015, of course, reflects the situation and the needs and the requirements of that time. And if you look at a complex topic such as V2X, frequency support, all those different use cases, of course, you need a bit more fancy stuff in the protocol to be able to do that in a good way. So those mechanisms that you would need to do those kind of advanced smart charging use cases, for that version, the protocol 2.0.1 is best fit. But still, the 1.6 protocol is still supported, still rolled out, currently being used in Korea. So that version is still going strong. So we are an industry association, so we listen to what the industry needs or what regulators need. So a recent example of that are the California pricing requirements. We incorporated them. In Korea, there was this need for support for mode 1-2 chargers only. So the total opposite of complex V2X charging stations for frequency support are just simple basic mode 1-2 charging stations, which do not offer smart charging, but are quite compact and low cost. And we see at the Open Charge Alliance all these different developments still going on and still valid, and we support all of them. There is some parts of the world would prefer Open Charge Alliance to become a formal standards organization, or OCPP to become a formal standard. It is not in all industries where by definition standards should be set up by ISOs or IECs or whatever, but as many utilities prefer to have a formal standard. So we are working with formal standard setting organizations. It's not so easy because in standard setting organizations, there's a lot of politics. And there are in some standards organizations, certain industry groups that are very strongly represented. So they are very vocal about the needs of their specific industry. And as you know, with EV charging, it is not about one industry being dominant. It's about different industries working together. It's about car industries, utility industries, electrical industries, startups, IT, service providers. So all the industries need to be able to make this a success. So having said that, the European Commission has mandated the standards for Europe to Sensenelec, and we are discussing with Sensenelec about the formal standardization of OCPP. In the United States, the request for formal standardization is not as vocal as in other places of the world. So the United States, we don't hear that they must have an IEEE standard, otherwise they won't trust it, or so we don't have heard that from the United States. And as I mentioned, in Europe, it's Sensenelec. And I'm not sure what India prefers, if their request for an IEC standard is also very important. And of course, we'll have to make sure that we get there.
And Lonika, thank you for all those great points. I completely concur with you in my experience of standardizing OpenEDR and going through all of this process right from scratch all the way until having it served on the plate. It's not an easy process working with the SDOs, and it's time consuming and it's very resource intensive. So, but really appreciate your insights and the great work that you've done in standardizing interoperability, advancing electric mobility. So really appreciate the work that OCA has done so far, and I'm sure there's a lot more to do as well. And thank you for all your efforts. With that, Reggie, is anybody walking through the questions on the chat within ISGF, or you want me to do that?
Yes, they will project the questions, and
Okay.
you could read it and assign to each speaker.
Sounds good. So there are two very important questions. Great. I'm glad you had both those there. One question came from attendee specifically understanding how can we address peak load demand using EV charging. Anybody wants to take this question? Before that, I would like to also highlight that it's not just about the bidirectional charging like V2G, V2H. It also could be managed charging like V1G. as well. So just we'll keep that in mind as some of the solutions. Okay, anybody wants to take this question first?
Maybe you could do that better, Girish.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a moderator. I would rather have this panelist speak about it, but I think it's there are many ways we can do that, right? When we talk about grid integrated vehicle, I should have given this a little bit of background. We talk about three very important aspects of grid integrated vehicles. We call them, Reggie mentioned V2X. Within the V2X, the first one is the V1G, or smarter managed charging. Here, you don't discharge the batteries. You just shift the charging to times when the demand is low, right? So, or the supply is, there's enough supply. So shifting it from a peak period to a non-peak period. So a lot of time of use rates that allow you to do that. So some dynamic tariffs are being proposed here in California, including some emergency programs that allows EVs to become a good resource by charging at the times when there's abundant supply available. That's one way you can think about it. The second, pilots that are working with Pacific Gas and Electric, for example, here in Northern California, and a lot of other utilities are also doing, are pilots with the other two V2X aspect, vehicle to grid and vehicle to home, is how you can capture the bidirectionality of the charging to enable, make it a grid resource, so that becomes not just as a sink, but also a source of electricity. At the time of resiliency, as you can see, you may have heard about some of the challenges that Texas is facing and California is facing for many different reasons, heat and freezing in Texas, as well as heat and wildfires in California. The resiliency is becoming an important topic. So how can you use existing resource as opposed to fossil-based generation or diesel generation to use your vehicles? The Chevy Silverado truck that I mentioned has 200 kilowatt hour batteries. It's a lot of battery capacity, even if you look at 2 to 3 kilowatts of peak availability. So you're looking at around 150, 200 hours of charging capacity available in the vehicle itself to charge homes in case of an emergency. You may not need it for those entire 200 hours, but even if you can charge it for a day or day and a half, it's a big, big relief. So we're looking at those as some of the solutions from the resiliency, but also address the peak demand. But I know, Rodney, I'm sure, and also maybe you, Catherine, have done a lot of work in your organizations to answer this question. Do you have any quick comments on this topic?
I would just add that minimum demand is almost as big a problem, and it's increasing here as well because of rooftop solar feeding into the grid in the middle of the day. So there's a great incentive for people that have rooftop solar and an EV is to not just have a cheaper tariff, but have free charging because they're using their excess solar. So I think V1G or a more localized sort of excess solar solution within someone's home is something that's going to become more and more popular.
Great point in terms of absorbing the excess renewables. It's also an important point, not just trying to reduce your consumption. Great. So Rodney, any quick thoughts that you may want to add?
Completely agree.
Okay, that's a very good endorsement. Thank you for that. So moving on to the next question from the audience. This is focusing a lot on the battery aspects, right? So we know the way that electric vehicles is kind of inextricably linked with the electric grid. It's also kind of inextricably linked with the battery or the energy source it uses. There is a lot of work that shows majority of the batteries in use in the vehicles are lithium-ion battery, right? There's a literature being quoted. I'm not familiar with that, but it says 90% of the batteries belong to lithium-ion category, as opposed to other counterpart, which is the fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, right? So question really comes is, what about the sustainability of lithium-ion battery and its life cycle, especially during recycling? There are two aspects that I mentioned, the hydrometallurgy and pyrometallurgy. For those, to give a little bit of background, hydrometallurgy is trying to extract the rare earth minerals in the batteries through heat and using a fire as a key source. So you kind of burn some of the not required metals, but extract the metals that you really need and reuse them in the batteries. And that's pyrometallurgy, and hydro is doing the same thing using water as a key source and some alkaline chemicals that allows you to kind of extract those metals. So those are very important, some of the work that is happening here, even in the United States and Europe, if I remember correctly, to really leverage those as some of the key ways to recycle. But I know we don't have real battery experts, but you guys have worked with batteries extensively. So any quick comments or thoughts on those on that question?
This almost same questions came yesterday also. I said yesterday we had a similar side event on replacing diesel generating sets with lithium-ion batteries. So there again, so I mentioned that it's too early to talk about this subject because technologies are coming in. There are earlier small batteries which were there in the cell phones and laptops, etc., being recycled successfully in different places. But now the big bus batteries, car batteries are coming for recycling. And when you retire a battery from an electric vehicle, it will still have 90-92% efficiency. It can still go for stationary applications for another 5-10 years. So that phase is still going on. So the absolute end of life, reprocessing when it comes, there are technologies, there are companies, and in fact, one of the world leading company is a company called TESS. So TESS in Singapore. So I visited them, their factory in April this year, 2 months ago. A week later, they were acquired by SK Group of Korea. So and they've been building recycling plants, bigger size. The Singapore one is a smaller one. A bigger one they've been building in Australia, in China, in Netherlands, and they were planning for one in India. That's why I visited them and met them. So this similarly, there's a Canadian company, there are 2 US companies, there's a German company. They are all perfected the technology without much of environmental damage. They are able to reclaim lithium and other materials. So this will mature as the price of this material goes up. At a certain stage, it is not economically viable to do that. Like only when the price of oil went beyond a number, then only the what do you call that gas in shale gas in US became attractive. The same way, the lithium prices when Tesla was launched in 2010-11 time, the lithium price was somewhere around $6,000 per ton. Today it stands closer to $80,000 per ton. So as the price becomes more and more technologies will come, and it will be economically attractive to extract this. So if you worry much about it today, it's not going to take off. So that's my take on it.
Great. Thanks, Reggie. Anyone else wants to really address this topic real quick? I think Reggie captured a great summary. Thank you, Reggie, for that. We will take one last question in the interest of time. We want to be respectful of all the panelists' time as well as the other audience. There is a question on the battery safety aspects, right? A lot of good questions on the battery.
I'll be happy to.
You want to address that, Reggie?
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that because fire happened only in 2-wheelers basically, and most of the new 2-wheeler. I mean, this particular subject is not relevant to this discussion. Our main theme, V2G or grid integrated vehicle, is not relevant. But still, having a question came, which is very much in the public life, public place in India today. A series of vehicles of different manufacturers, 2-wheelers, caught fire in India summer. So India summer, this is 45 degree, 48 degrees centigrade, and 48 degree when it is a ambient temperature, degree centigrade I'm talking about. So the battery temperature in these 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers where there is no active cooling, it will be well above 60 degrees centigrade. So there was a narrative by some certain people that LFP has reached its theoretical maximum. The efficiency of LFP batteries or the energy density of LFP batteries will not go beyond some X number, and so it is dead. China has withdrawn the subsidy for that in 5 years ago, So the future is only NMC. These such statements were made by very people in places of authority. So many of the unsuspecting entrepreneurs who came out with the two-wheeler and three-wheeler manufacturing in India, none of them are battery experts. None of them are actually EV experts. They were all basically computer science graduates and people who could get money from the venture capitalists to start this kind of things, and they have zero R&D facilities, particularly on the battery side. So they all went for NMC batteries because of the higher energy density and the smaller form factor and longer range. You put a battery of this size in NMC, you get 100 kilometer. You put the same size battery LFP, you may get maybe 70 kilometer, so or 60 kilometers. So they all went for the NMC without active cooling, and when temperature, that too cells imported from China and BMS made in India without knowing the actual battery chemistry of the cells which is imported. And even if the technical person in China explained, all the technical people there, they don't speak English. And the people who translate, they don't understand technology. So with all this contributed to complete disconnect between the man who wrote the persons who wrote the BMS and those who sized and put this battery into the two-wheelers and the actual cell manufacturer. So it's a mistake, and I hope that people will correct it and they will go the right way. And the narrative of this LFP drug is completely wrong. Actually, many of the big companies like CATL and BYD, they all continue to manufacture LFP batteries, and the energy density of LFP battery has also gone much higher today. 150, 160 watt-hour per kg batteries are there, and those are the ones which can sustain even in 40, 45 degrees centigrade. But NMC being used in buses, in cars in India, with active cooling, they have no complaint, and they are still working perfect.
Yeah, excellent point, Reggie. I mean, the safety standards make a very critical role, and if you don't test them for safety before you deploy, you will experience these challenges, not just with lithium-ion, anything else in life, right? Your electricity system, your transformers, your substations all have the similar issues. If you don't test them really well and adhere to those safety conditions, you may have to run into issues as unfortunate they might sound to be. So thank you, appreciate that. Anyone else wants to take this question before we kind of wrap up? Okay, hearing none. So I think I really like to thank all the panelists. Excellent, presentations and briefings and questions. And thanks for the audience for staying up a little bit late and then asking those great questions. I think we went through a lot of topics while focusing on the grid integrated vehicles and addressing some of the issues with the Asian countries in transitioning them into electric mobility. I certainly look forward to next year or two when we might be even more aggressive and come with some key facts and results that might show how grid integrated vehicles are contributing. So really appreciate all the contribution for all the panelists. Excellent work, and thank you so much for your time. Over to you, Asima. Asima must be on mute.
Yes, thank you, Grish, for moderating this session so well. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, thank you,
Is that
Grish,
Reena?
for moderating.
Over to you, Reena. Yeah.
No, the closing remarks will be by Mr. Reggie. And before we wrap up, we would like to have a group photograph with all our panelists. Requesting all the panelists to.
You can stop sharing the screen.
Yes,
then
sir.
please, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody who is there on the panel, I mean, staying back and switch on their camera, we'll have a group photo.
Other than the panelists can also switch on the camera, the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also requesting all the participants to participate in the polling. The links are posted in the chat box.
So, nothing much to talk about as a closing remarks. We discussed a lot. I like to just mention one more thing, that a very interesting uh, pilot project we are going to do. This is because of a revolutionary order issued by Ministry of Power recently, which says that for those who want to buy green electricity, they can buy it under open access rules. Open access means that a consumer can select a supplier anywhere in the country, and the wheeling charges, transmission distribution charges you pay. And like I have a public charging station in Delhi, and my minimum load for this new rule is 100 kilowatt. So if I have a building or I have a charging station, and my load is 100 kilowatt and above, I can buy green electricity. I can directly contract with a solar farm developer in a different state, or in Delhi or Rajasthan or anywhere, and I can have a long-term agreement with him. He will give me, and the network operators, the transmission and distribution network operators, I have to pay a fee based on their some formula which will come out soon. So this is going to set aside. I mean, what we are going to do is to, as ISGF, we are already proposing to do a pilot project with some public charging stations in Delhi, Bangalore, and Bombay. We will offer a choice for the customers. EV drivers coming to a public charging station will have a choice to go for green electrons or regular electrons. Maybe for a premium of 2 rupees or 1 rupee, they have the choice of buying green electricity, and the charging station of operator will be able to give a certificate of origin generated on a blockchain platform, that 10 units or 50 units of electricity which is put into the vehicle is actually came from a solar farm or a wind farm some place, and that certificate of origin will give the pride for the EV owner that yes, I am not adding to the pollution by driving an electric vehicle, by buying electricity from a coal-fired plant. Rather, I bought this 30 or 50 units of electricity from a clean energy source. So this is a pilot which we will roll out this year, and this will be again one of its first of its kind of project anywhere in the world. So we hope in the next ACEF we will be able to present the actual use case of this, as well as the V2G project which we will do in India along with the University of Delaware. Thank you very much, and everybody stay safe, and look forward to seeing you face to face at the next ACEF. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.